We finished and they said, "Way to go, Bill, and thank you for sharing at that level with us." God will continue captivating people with the possibility. That's the best thing that you could have. It's more in order to get to know God. That changes things. It changes life. I don't think there are many churches like that. I'm just curious to see what God will do.
Hey everybody, Chris Macky here. Welcome to VCCLife, a podcast for and by the Vineyard Community Church in St. Louis, Missouri. This podcast is a space for a church in transition. As we navigate change, we believe God is calling us into something new, a fresh way of thinking about faith, community, and what it means to be the church. We're leaning in, listening, and experimenting with what it looks like for Jesus to lead us. Join us as we wrestle, reflect, and step forward together into God's unfolding story. Hey friends, just a quick personal note before we listen to this final episode of VCCLife. I hope you, like me, have been captured by this story that God is writing in our church and that you're excited and hopeful for what God has in store for us. As you listen to this episode, I think you'll agree with me because of his wisdom and ability to communicate what God is doing and his inspiring words of hope that Bill is the perfect person to cap off this season of VCCLife. Enjoy. If you're in our church, you know that I'm here with Bill McKay. And by the way, McKay and Macky, I mean, we were the same clan way back at some point.
Yeah.
You know, back in Scotland, right?
And I've been to Scotland and seen the castle that Clan Mackay lived in. Clan
Mackay.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's way up in the northwestern part of the top of Scotland.
Okay. Yeah. That's fascinating. So we have a kindred, family tree.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We're almost brothers, is what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to get as close to you as possible because you're like the wise sensei in our church.
Oh. Huh.
You know, and so I'm just trying to, I'm a lot like Bill if you think about it, except, minus a lot of the things that make Bill. But anyway, so you're going to cap off this podcast season for us.
Mm-hmm. Good.
I think that's totally appropriate.
Okay.
You are such a wonderful, reflective, thoughtful minister with a pastoral heart, but also you see deeply into people and processes and you can articulate the reflections well. And so let's do that this episode, rather than walking through kind of your experience of, when David announced his retirement, where were you, and LSAT, and all that kind of stuff. And actually, let's just reflect on the things that we've heard in the podcast, but bigger than that. We don't want to reflect on a podcast. We want to reflect on the things that you experienced that we spoke about in the podcast. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so will you just share what your role has been these last few years in leadership in the church?
Yes. If you go back more than a few years, I had the privilege of capping off my work career with 5 years as a staff pastor here, and retired at the end of April in 2020.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was anything else happening in the
something I've forgotten.
What was that called?
COVID. Okay. And since then, I've been a part of the pastoral council, was a leadership community pastor for a number of years, have been on the teaching team, and the joy of my heart is I get to play bass with the worship team. That's just a lot of fun for me. Yeah. It's very life-giving. Those are the roles I can think of.
You've played a significant role in this transition time the last 3 or 4 years. And as we record this, David's 4 days away from
his final party.
Yeah. And so these last 4 years, especially since 2021, have been what we're calling really the transition time of preparing and discerning. What has been your role in that?
So I was not a part of the LSAT.
LSAT? What is that?
Leadership Structure Assessment Team.
Okay. What do you think of that name?
It's descriptive. It accurately describes very clunkily what it is the team was trying to do, at least when they started out. But I knew as a member of the pastoral council, when LSAT was done with their work, then they would bring it to the pastoral council, and I'd have an opportunity to bring input at that point.
And so they worked for
3 or 4 years, yeah.
Several years, and they brought to you. Do you remember when they brought the report to you, or the what would you call it? What did they bring to you?
Yeah, it was more just conversations. It wasn't like, here's a document.
Right.
But rather, it was something that happened gradually.
Yeah.
Emily was a trailblazer and was starting to use the Pursuing God's Will Together with teams that she was working on as a staff member, and also I think with the rest of the staff.
Yeah.
She would come to pastoral council and talk about her joys and her frustrations with that process. It certainly didn't happen quickly or easily. So I was learning about it there. I remember going for a while thinking, boy, I wish I'd been on LSAT, because then I'd be able to understand what these guys are talking about. And so
Emily's coming to pastoral council. She's sharing about how she's implementing. You're hearing it kind of from the outside as someone who is not part of the LSAT or part of the process. So you're learning a little bit. But there came a point where you implemented the Pursuing God's Will Together process, right?
On the pastoral council?
On the pastoral council.
Yeah.
Just tell us about that.
That was a deliberate decision. An essential part of Pursuing God's Will Together is the community that forms in the group doing the discerning. And this was a level of community that Caleb and Emily had been through it. And Emily was saying, I don't know if I can go through this again. And I thought, what is it that is that intense? But and what it ended up being was a very high level of vulnerability. By nature of personality and past experience, I'm someone who tends to think a lot before I talk. Mm-hmm. If I have a choice between sharing something or not sharing something, unless I'm triggered, I pretty much don't share. And what I was learning from the others on the pastoral council was that doesn't work if we want to build community, that all of us need to be sharing at challenging levels. And it was hard for me, but I got the message, and I got to the point where I was sharing more of what I was feeling when the conversations were going on, and how sometimes I was feeling left out, and sometimes I was so frustrated at going 30 minutes without being able to get a word in edgewise that when I finally got to talk, it was like, get out of my way. I'm going to say my bit now. And it was hard for all of us, I think. And we had some really challenging, down-to-earth conversations. And in the process, I learned to know Caleb and Emily and David better than I had ever known them before. It was just hard for me to risk looking foolish, to risk talking about what I was really actually feeling, when half the time I thought, I don't know if I'm justified in having those feelings or not.
Right.
And the craziest thing that happened is I would do something that was really challenging for me, and it sort of left me feeling drained.
Right.
And we finished, and they said, way to go, Bill, and thank you for sharing at that level with us. And I was a little bit taken aback. Yeah. But it's been a growth process. Mm-hmm. And now our team is at the point where sometimes some of us will get triggered. And by the end of the meeting, there's no rancor, there's no leftover hurt feelings or animosity. It's just God really blessed us today by letting us be together and to process together like this. Isn't it a miracle that we can process together like this?
Wow, that's so good.
Yeah.
And that's very different, right?
It is. Oh, yeah.
Share a little bit more about how you've reflected on that difference of what community could be now that you're learning this process.
It's added a lot of, I'd even call it beauty to my life. It has me hungering for the warmth of community more than I have in many, many decades. Just seeing the benefit of community and of trusting one another. Everybody being in the soup instead of some people holding back, or instead of me holding back. One of the things about pursuing God's will together is, in the end, the spiritual well-being of the people in the group doing the discerning is infinitely more important than any discerning that that group does or does not do. And yeah, I cut my career teeth in an environment where you produce or you get ridiculed. And here are these people whom I really respect. And they're saying, produce, don't produce. The most important thing is that you, Bill, feel welcomed and feel cared for by God. It's a new way of thinking.
So you were experiencing this depth of community because the LSAT had introduced you to a process. You know, they were tasked with coming up with a structure, right? And instead, they brought you this way of being together in the church and said, I think this is the thing that God is doing.
Yeah.
And you were learning that and experiencing that on pastoral council.
Mm-hmm.
Where else have you seen a team gel like that? A team experience community like that?
Yeah, I had some doubts initially about the discerning God's will together. So in preparation for Easter of 2024, Emily convened a discernment team. And I wanted to be a part of that discernment team because I wanted to see this discernment stuff in action, this pursuing God's will together in action. And I remember we had 2 or 3 meetings, and it started off like so many meetings that I've been to, but something happened in the 3rd meeting. We had been sort of just hammering out some stuff, and then somebody posited an idea. And I felt this thing come over the group where all of a sudden, everybody in the group was in agreement. And furthermore, in thinking about that idea, everybody in the group, it seemed to me, felt all that we had been talking about pulled together by that idea. And there was suddenly a spirit of unity. It goes way beyond consensus. It was a spirit of the Holy Spirit being there and blessing the discussion with this unified way of looking at things. And from that point on, the trust in the group was different. And I thought, this is what they're talking about. This is people coming to an understanding of God's will together. And when that happens, God blesses it. Mm-hmm. Or God even creates it with blessing.
Right.
And that was very interesting. Yeah. It made me want to pursue this and learn more about this. Yeah.
What I heard in that is that there was a depth of community that resulted, and there was a sense of God's presence and a trust in one another.
Yes.
That went to a deeper level.
Yeah.
Because you were approaching the task with different priorities than we had in the past. The different priorities were, let's pursue God together. Let's not just plan a program.
Yeah.
And let's see where this goes. And it took a few meetings to kind of, understanding what we were doing, because all of us in the room, and I was there, we were new to this process.
Yep.
This was kind of like a lab experiment for Emily to lead us through this process and to see where it went.
Yeah.
And so that was, and I think that that's going to be an approach that, don't you agree?
That
how
people
this is going to roll out.
People will experience something similar.
Yeah, we'll have more experiments. Let's try it this way.
Yeah.
Let's discern God's will together, and let's grow together as a group, and spiritual formation, and as you mentioned, that's primary.
Yeah.
Spiritual formation in a group. So.
Yep.
What I hear you saying, Bill, is what started out as a retirement announcement and the formation of a team to say, what structure should we have, has become something much bigger, much broader, much deeper, and in your words, much more beautiful than just a new structure, right?
Yeah. The structure part is still sort of
amorphous.
Yeah. But the spiritual satisfaction of seeking God's will together, and then wonder of wonders, God responds. That's very real. And it's just trying to find what kind of container will contain that. And one of the things we've been talking about as a transition team is how can we find a structure that will keep it necessary for us to pursue Jesus as the head of our church and not try to come up with substitutes. So it seems to me that this process God is going to use to create a virtuous cycle in our church where more and more people will pursue individual spiritual growth and not pursue it individually, but in a community. And that's going to set the example for the next group, and that'll keep happening. And then people will pursue God's will together. And in order to do that, they'll have to fight through the community issues that come up. It's a real humbling process. And if we're unwilling to surrender ourselves to God, then we'll probably just burn out and quit. And going through that experience and learning to trust several other people more deeply than you've trusted anybody, maybe with a few exceptions, that's going to bring a new level of relational maturity to our church. And it's like the level of spiritual and emotional maturity is just going to keep rising. And there will be different layers of people who are further into it or not as far into it yet. But God will continue captivating people with the possibility of knowing God and knowing one another well enough to be able to understand what it is that God wants us to do. Maybe I'm naive, but for me, that's it. that's the best thing that you could have, especially in a church. Been a part of lots of churches and haven't seen that before.
How would you describe how you sense where God is leading us in the future? You say you haven't seen it in another church before.
Yeah.
Do you expect? What word would you use? You expect? Do you hope? Do you envision that in our church?
I'm a little bit cautious about that because our new priority is not to try to conjure up and spin and cast visions. Our new priority is to sit and wait until Jesus tells us what he wants us to do. And so that's a much slower process in one sense. It's probably a much faster process over the years because you don't have 15 failed attempts.
Are you excited
Yeah.
what God is doing?
Yeah, I am.
How so?
Ignatius Loyola says discernment is not so much for the purpose of getting to know what God wants. It's more in order to get to know God and to get to know God's boundless, passionate love for each of us individually. It's like God, in his infinite capacity, looks at each of us individually, and when he sees us, he smiles, says, "That's my kid." I don't know when that becomes clear and when we believe that enough to not sort of just shuffle it off, but really believe that God sees me, and even when I blow it, God says, "That's my kid. I love her, I love him," more than I can say. That changes things. It changes life. It helps bring healing to the wounds that we all carry from our past. It helps bring wholeness where we've probably been unbalanced as we were trying to run our own lives. It brings joy, and joy is pretty slippery. That's been hard for me to grab a hold of what that means, but I'm at a point now where I don't put it in words very well, but I know it when I feel it, and by God's grace, I'm feeling it more often. I'm excited quite a bit about the spiritual growth that I think is going to happen in our church. I'm also excited to see what can happen if a church says, we're only going to do what Jesus tells us to do, and then actually gets past all of the competition and the hurt feelings and the human foibles and et cetera, to get to the point where we can actually do that. How's God going to use that? I don't think there are many churches like that. I don't mean to sound triumphalistic or anything like that, but I'm just curious to see what God will do. He's making us into that kind of church. And what's he going to do with us?
Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, you're welcome.